Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sanam Abdul with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we are talking about two very important stories. The first of which is something that we've discussed in a previous show before. We know that there is a London-based law firm that has filed a report against war crimes in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and has given huge amounts of evidence with regards to the kind of practices that the Indian officials have undertaken over there and also blaming, of course, the Chief of Army staff and another senior Indian government official responsible for these war crimes. Now, of course, the matter that was being discussed earlier as well was whether or not this law firm and its application is going to result in any investigation by the UK police, whether or not this is going to be taken up and actually investigated, and will it result in some sort of a consequence for the people responsible? This, of course, is a larger question, but for today's show, we will be joined by the Director of International Law at Stoke, which is the firm that has actually filed the application. So we'll get a first-hand view as to what the evidence is, how it points towards what has been going on in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and the kind of scale and scope that, of course, the police has in terms of investigating the matter. What really is going to be the factor that is going to decide whether or not this investigation is going to be taken up, and then, of course, if it does, what can we see as the options or consequences that perhaps the Indian officials can actually face. So here's to knowing whether or not something will finally actually be done against people who are involved in these war crimes in the occupied valley or not. So let's see how far that goes. And we'll also be taking a look at Pakistan's economic situation. Of course, this is also something that has been surrounding a lot of speculation, a lot of uncertainty, specifically with regards to the political scenario that is going on in the country, and then, of course, rising inflation, with the general public also talking about price hike. This, of course, points towards whether or not our economy is on the right track. Is our government making the right measures, taking the right steps with regards to what needs to be done? In this matter, we know that the monetary policy that had to be announced by the State Bank of Pakistan has maintained its status quo at the interest rate of 9.75%. How that is going to impact inflation and economic growth, why was this important, and what do we predict in the coming days is what we're going to be discussing in the show today. And as you can see, I've been joined by Farooq Batafi and Raja Faisal, as always, in the studio, and we'll be joined by our guests online as well. Before I welcome our respected guests from Stoke, let's first of all, of course, look at the situation with regards to the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and of course the kind of war crimes that have been going there. What we really, of course, want is some sort of a consequence, and whether or not that can actually be achieved is the bigger question. Faisal, we've discussed this at length so many times as to the kind of situation that has been going on. This seems like a step with a slight amount of possibility. What the scope is, we'll discuss further with our respected guests from Stoke. But with regards to what you hope for coming out from this investigation, do you think it can actually be achieved or not? I'll come back to you, Faisal. Let me also welcome in the show today Mr. Hakan Camuz, who's the Director of International Law at Stoke. I hope, Mr. Hakan, that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If I'm not, please do correct me. Yeah, Mr. Hakan, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Am I saying your name correctly? Is it Hakan Camuz?
That's correct, yes.
That's correct. Great. Thank you very much. We had quite a bit of a deliberation before the show started. I'm glad I got it right. With regards to what, of course, your the law firm where you are at has brought about in terms of the kind of evidence, the kind of war crimes that, of course, have been committed in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir for a long time now. It points to, of course, the fact and the hope that perhaps this time around the evidence will not be discarded and something's going to be done about it. Before I move on to what really can we see coming out from this evidence, can you also please elaborate for us the scale and the level of the evidence that you've gathered, what kind of war crimes have been committed, who all are responsible for it? So a bit about what the report actually talks about.
Of course. First of all, thank you for inviting me to your program.
Sure.
I can inform you that this is the first legal case of its kind for war crimes committed in Kashmir. by Indian government and its officials that submitted to UK authorities. The reason why we did it in the UK is because of the jurisdiction that the UK, we believe, has based on a universal jurisdiction principle. Because in the UK, you can make an application to the authorities for them to look into and investigate alleged crimes that's taken place. We say alleged because it's a legal terminology we have to use.
I understand.
But we know what happened because we've seen the evidence of what happened. And as a party to the complaint to the War Crimes Unit of UK's Metropolitan Police, we have to inform them of what happened. We present the case of our clients, along with many hundreds of statements and numerous evidences that we have collected on behalf of our clients and the wider crimes that's committed by the Indian officials in Kashmir. Right. We provide information to the police for them to investigate. Right. And Mr. investigating individuals that we believe are directly involved in these atrocities and their crimes have taken place in Kashmir. It's the first of its kind. So the investigation units have published a report of what they have witnessed and what they have gone through. They've gone through over 2,000 testimonials and collected various evidences available to them for us to prepare
Mr.
a legal application as well.
I hope you can hear me, Mr. Camuz. Let me first congratulate you on actually coming up with this report and this petition. It seems to be meticulous when it comes to gathering evidence. But let me ask you about one thing that you mentioned. You mentioned that you are invoking, universal jurisdiction. And then you also pointed out that this is the first case of its kind. Do we have any kind of precedence where similar kind of cases have actually amounted to, any kind of justice for the victims, sir?
I understand the skepticism that you have about international law somehow being a remedy to such war crimes taking place in Kashmir and elsewhere in the world. But if I can just remind you of the recent German court's decision to sentence a Syrian who worked for Assad to a life in prison. And the second case have recently started again in Germany of the Syrian nationals who were war criminals who were caught by the German police, and the universal jurisdiction cases that was run against them concluded with them being punished. Difference, of course, for our case at the moment, if I may say, is the perpetrators of the crimes that we've taken place in Kashmir are not caught, but we are hoping they will be. It's the names that we have provided to the British police for these individuals to be arrested is at their disposal at the moment. We cannot talk about it because this is part of the confidential application made to the police and given the names of the individuals that work for the Indian government and the kind of crimes they are directly involved in and committed in Kashmir.
Right, sure. Mr. Camuz, when we see that, of course, this evidence is right now being reviewed and then a decision is going to be taken whether or not an investigation is going to be opened up, what sort of factors are going to be taken into account to come to that decision or that conclusion? What is going to be the deciding point if this investigation is actually taken up or not?
We make this application based on the standard expected by such applications, which is obviously quite drawn in the law that allows us to make the application. So we, as a law firm, totally believe that we have already fulfilled the expected criteria by the quality of the evidence and the information we provided to the police. They have already allocated a detective constable to be in charge of the preliminary inquiries that they make, and we are assisting and helping them. And may I just inform you and those who are watching this program that this is an ongoing work. It's not finished. This is the part where we actually file the case, but our investigation team is still going through more evidence that come to light, and more evidence is still coming out. We have information about Israel's involvement, Israeli individuals' involvement in what's going on in Kashmir. And we're still building up that part of the investigations, more information coming out of this, which is quite strange to think that India would actually collaborate with Israel in what's going on in Kashmir. And it's something that's really interesting for us.
Mr. Camuz, let me first of all hail your initiative, because this is the first of its kind.
And very conscientious.
Yeah, and I think somebody is openly going against the barbarianism which is being conducted in Kashmir and in India right now. And I just wanted to highlight a fact that there must be the evidences of time during which, of course, the current Commander-in-Chief, who happens to be General Nirwane, he wasn't the Commander-in-Chief and somebody else was. Should we perceive that you would be including more names in coming future, because there were different people who were conducting the same barbarianism, and of course a series of draconian laws which is being implemented in Kashmir right now, how it would affect the kind of posture the India is having against within Kashmir right now?
And with your permission, if you allow me to actually add to this question, because I also am intrigued about the identification of people you have inculpated, right? I want to understand, because both of them have bosses. One has a defense minister as boss, the other one the prime minister. When did you and how did you decide where to actually draw a line that these two individuals are going to be identified? I ask this because these days both these gentlemen are in Narendra Modi's bad books, I think.
True.
And so we need to understand very clearly, we are a law firm, we act for our clients and within the scope of work that they've been instructed us to do. And so our investigation and illegal filing is based on their complaints. But obviously, more information is coming out. If we find many other names that may be somehow affiliated with such crimes, we will add them on to the file we opened with the Metropolitan Police. We have already given quite a high-ranking officials, I cannot name them here, because police have to have the confidentiality in their investigation. We have to respect that. And obviously, providing the police with an ongoing investigation means new information coming out, and if it's relevant to the filing we have made, naturally, of course, we would add names and evidence, because the police will only act on evidence, as you understand. We have to be respectable in the fact that we actually act in everything within the framework of law. This is not a political act. We don't basically just throw in things. We have evidence, we have names of people who actually, we know that committed the crime, and we present the evidence to the authorities for them to evaluate. And that's the role of a law firm, and that's all we do. The politicians' names are involved simply because they are ultimately responsible. And I could say that the Modi government, and he himself is directly responsible for those acts of war crimes in Kashmir, because he is elected head of state. Therefore, he is directly responsible for war crimes if the evidence presented is taken.
And I'm glad, Mr. Camuz, that you said that and made that very clear. When we talk about the universal jurisdiction principle, of course, as you've been saying, this is something that can actually happen, and the international law provides that sort of framework to deal with such war crimes elsewhere. But of course, we know that India has had a history of claiming a lot of the issues as internal matters, as domestic issues, as bilateral matters. It also has precedence of not allowing observer groups within its territory or other sort of third-party groups to sort of see what the situation is at hand. Of course, we can say that the principle exists, but how much guarantee there is for such an investigation to actually be allowed, or to actually be able to continue without any hindrance or blockage from the Indian side?
As a firm, we have quite an experience in dealing with these kind of cases. We've done these kind of cases in US in the past, where a political interference have taken place. I'm not saying it's not going to happen in the UK. Governments have a different way of dealing with things. But I can tell you right now, it is the governments, the current system in the world that we exist in, is not addressing the real and genuine suffering of people in Kashmir or elsewhere in the world, in Middle East, in Yemen. Look what's going on in Yemen. Yes, only 2 days ago, they bombed and killed civilians. And who's going to be accountable for this? So there is no effective and active international platform that actually has a means to implement some kind of accountability for those who commit such war crimes. In absence of that, the only thing we have at our disposal for the victims actually approach us is to somehow pursue justice for them and tell the world their story of what happened. And unfortunately, whilst we are talking about what's happening in China, to the Muslims in China, which of course we should, nobody seems to be talking about what's going on in Kashmir. And as if like Indian government is not committing war crimes every day, nobody talks about it. But they are committing war crimes almost every day in Kashmir. And so we need to highlight what's going on in Kashmir in a legal sense of the word, with the evidence, representing the clients so they can tell their story to the world. Because I assure you, the Indian system is not going to let them seek justice for what happened to them. We can see it openly in a matter of our client who actually did go to the court, and they take him to the court, and then that wasn't good enough, and they killed him extrajudicially. As if there's some kind of confrontation with him, and they killed him.
Yes,
Mr. Camuz, as you were earlier talking about adding few of the names incoming future, of course, your investigation is still going on. And should I be asking you that your investigation would lead towards obviously investigating about the Indian media as well, the role of Indian media? They have been obviously accomplice to these war crimes. They have been obviously accomplice to their government as well. And I know for the fact that last year, a couple of times, one of the channels, it was fined by the London courts for they were promoting hate, and they were shut down and they were blocked to do that. Their channels were banned in London. So should I be expecting from you that there will be media names as well? There are certain people who are sitting on media and 24/7 they are promoting hate, and they are promoting the actions which lead to war crimes by the government, and they promote that. Should we be expecting that, sir?
And this actually relates to what you have defined as structural violence in your report, sir.
I'll be honest with you. We are, as a law firm, limited to the scope that we've been instructed to do by our clients. And so it is only upon their instructions we act. We don't act on our own. We don't have that kind of authority to do so. And so far, the role of media, or some of the Indian government-related media, I mean, we have been receiving a lot of death threats. Some of the people have actually sent emails to us saying we're going to bomb our offices and etc. That kind of nasty stuff takes place. And people have an opinion. Everybody has an opinion in the world. A lot of people have an opinion about Kashmir. And what's going on in Kashmir. Everybody says things. If you really want to go down that route of trying to fight every single individual for what they say and do, I don't think we're going to have enough time. We don't want to lose the focus on trying to seek justice for our clients. We try to basically seek justice for our clients against those who actually did nasty things and committed those crimes. Right. People say things, and if you're going to try and pursue everybody who says nasty things, that's going to require a lot of time, a lot of manpower, a lot of money, and police and authorities. I mean, look, try to focus on the issue. The issue is Indian governments and their officials and their agents are committing war crimes in Kashmir. Our clients have suffered from it. We represent this to them, and we fight on for justice for these people here in UK and elsewhere. And if I may then take this opportunity to inform you, yes, of course, our investigation is ongoing. And of course, there are other names that we are considering, and there are other countries and crimes that have actually taken place that it's within our focus, and we are looking into that as well. This is just the beginning of what's happening. So I can tell you, this is an ongoing matter.
That's an impressive beginning. Let me actually bring you back to one country that you have pointed out, which has a clear role. You have India is, of course, one state actor, but you have also in your report given harrowing details of Israeli involvement as well. Do you have any plans to actually involve Israel later on in this as well? Because there seems to be humongous torture there.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Do we have any plans to involve what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Your report actually mentions a second state actor, that is Israel. Israel has also played a role in Kashmir, right? So do you have any plans to prosecute anyone from their side as well, sir?
So this part, we've actually said it in our report. If I can draw your attention to what the investigation team's report that they've published have said, it's on the website. They've actually talked about the direct involvement. This means there is a testimonials and other evidence available to them, and information about this is still being accumulated, and more in-depth analysis are being made, and investigation and collecting evidence about this going on. We do have various other plans, not just that. And along with that, this is something that we will consider, of course, in the future.
Right. I want to understand one thing, Camuz. Whatever you're saying, of course, is pointing towards a lot of effort and a lot of bravery as well, with the kind of threats, of course, that you're also pointing out, and the kind of tasks that you're up against. And you've mentioned before, of course, that there will be and has been in the past as well political involvement in such scenarios. But what you're dealing with, of course, are issues that are decades old, issues that are coming from the topmost authorities and countries, the top decision makers. Of course, countries themselves have their own relations, their own interests, their economic and political interests with each other. How do you think that this law firm is going to stand up against all of that? And what do you think, what makes you so sure that this is going to be seen to meet its own end? Because we've seen in the previous times organizations such as the UN or other international law bodies actually also claiming a lot of things but having no real power or say, and not really any sort of a result for the people who are actually suffering in occupied Kashmir. Can you guarantee that perhaps this will be taken to its logical conclusion?
The only thing we can guarantee is that on behalf of our clients, we have submitted a legal application furnishing the authorities here in UK with a very clear evidence that we presented to them for them to actually open up an investigation of what happened to our clients. It's a small step in the right direction. Now, you all know this is a political conflict. Political conflicts cannot be resolved with these kind of legal applications. And we are, as a law firm, only focused on seeking justice for the clients that we have.
Sure.
Nothing more. So highlighting the issue of what happened, i.e. the war crimes have taken place, rape, murder. I mean, there's so many things have happened. We've actually issued this as an evidence, as well as speaking to the public as a law firm, as a representative of our clients. We are highlighting what's going on and the war crimes taking place. We're not an NGO.
So that's going to be the maximum. Let me put it this another way. Are you willing to bear all costs to seek justice for your client?
We are paid by our clients, and so we're not paying any cost. The only cost you're talking about is if our reputation or somehow we are being threatened. I can inform you that we have been fighting international war crimes cases against Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, Assad regime, Egyptian regime. And that's because this is where the conflicts are. And we have clients who come to us because this is what we do. And law firms are not afraid of being tackled by such challenges because that's what you do. You represent your clients, you present their cases. There's nothing we're saying about it. This is what the clients say. It's their.
Right. Sorry to cut you, Mr. Camuz. I've seen the record of your firm. It is very impressive, and repeatedly you have been successful. The question now is about the trajectory of this whole case and process. How does it evolve? Does the buck stop with the British authorities, or it can someday go to some higher courts like International Criminal Court or International Court of Justice as well?
No, these applications are not, that's not the legal path it can take. The legal path for it is a UK jurisdiction. And those individuals, and there are many of them who actually come and go to UK, are now basically, hopefully, that will be investigated by the UK authority, the police. So if they were to come into UK or any other country, if I can ask you to take a hint from this, or any other country where they travel, they will be at our request, hopefully arrested and questioned by the war crimes investigation units of UK or elsewhere.
So,
Saying
so
that,
that means
when it comes to international law, there are not many international platforms where you can take these cases. So, International Court of Justice, that's state-to-state activities. International Criminal Court is only has a jurisdiction within the Rome Statute. So, if you read the Rome Statute, there's like a member states, or if there's a referral from United Nations Security Council, that's when they have the jurisdiction. So, in the case of Kashmir, unfortunately, ICC do not have jurisdiction. And so this is, if you think about it, as far as international law is concerned, one of the best things to do, given the circumstances, is a universal jurisdiction principle to be activated and exercised, which is exactly what our clients have chosen to do.
Yeah, Mr. Camuz, I have another question related to people who might get added into the investigation and the case. There was a name, CDS, the ex-CDS, the former CDS, obviously General Bipin Rawat. His name echoed again and again, while obviously he was commanding the Indian forces. He's someone who, justified human shielding the Kashmiris, which happens to be a war crime. And then there is another one. He actually justified the lynching as well. So could we expect that in coming future, he has been he died recently, his name can be included as well,
like Cromwell or something?
I am not privy to be informing on the TV, of course, whose name we have included or we will be including, because I will be breaching the confidentiality principle.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude. It's just that
no. But the question. Let us actually explain the question, Mr. Camuz. The question is whether,
if I can just inform you, and I understand, of course, you are better observant of what's going on in Kashmir than us all the way from here, London. But I can inform you. There are many.
Can we give it shape of a theoretical question here? Just to understand, can the names of deceased be included as well or not?
Sorry?
The names of deceased people who have died but who might have actually committed human rights violations.
Oh, of course. In fact, one of our clients has been killed by Indian authorities, and it is on behalf of his family members that we are acting, seeking justice for his killing, extrajudiciary killing. And so victims, or family members of the victims, can seek justice for what happened to their loved ones.
So if they give any names, obviously they can be included in.
Right, we were actually talking about the names of the people who had actually gone in terms of the one who have committed the crimes. But let's move forward with the fact that when we speak about the kind of war crimes, of course, that have existed in India illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the kind of justifications or the garb under which we've seen the Indian forces hide is, of course, that the people that have been targeted are terrorists, so to speak. And of course, this sort of changes the way their crimes are being viewed, both inside India and elsewhere as well. With regards to, of course, the evidence that you have accumulated and the kind of definitions that we see coming out of who really is a terrorist and who can be targeted as one, how will this evidence and then the investigation, hopefully, that will follow cater to these issues?
Look, terrorism is defined by respective governments. Everybody has their own definition of what they deem to be terrorist. Can you define millions of people who actually live in Kashmir as terrorists? I mean, no court will accept them to be terrorists. Or if you have any affiliation to these organizations in Kashmir that somehow you're terrorists, but they are defining these people as terrorists, doesn't mean legally they are. That just doesn't mean that. And their definition is not something that is accepted globally. There's no way the global audience, or the countries for that matter, unilaterally just in a unified manner, accepts assertion by the Indian government that people in Kashmir are somehow all terrorists and they have to fight this. And this is what the subject of this global war on terror. That's the justification they use for the atrocities and war crimes they're committing. They're not going to get away with it. There will be many, many people, just like our clients, that will eventually come out and evidence will surface and people will actually make applications for perpetrators of these crimes to be accountable for what they did, just like how our clients did it. This is the first, but I assure you, it's not the last. And our investigation and filing is ongoing too. So now is time for atrocities that's taking place in India to be in Kashmir to be exposed properly and legally.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Hakan Camuz,
you.
for joining us and giving so much of your time and talking at length about the investigation and the evidence that Stoke White, the London-based law firm, has accumulated and presented to the UK police for, of course, further investigation. We hope the decision is actually taken for this investigation to actually open up. Yes, Faisal.
Yeah, but Sana, I just wanted to add in that fair enough, this is an excellent initiative by Hakan Camuz, but I am expecting that in coming future there will be organization, environment related organization that should come forward and have a similar case against the Indian Army and the Indian government as well. Why? Because what they did I think a year ago, that they cut the apple trees of Kashmiris in Indian illegally occupied Kashmir, and that just to obviously they just wanted to hit their economics, and to me I think it is a war crime as well.
Right.
A war crime against the nature, a war crime against the environment.
Yeah.
So somebody should come forward and book them again.
Right,
Yes.
and when you are talking about Kashmir, Faisal, the problem so far has been that there isn't any dearth of human rights violations. Remember that only a few years ago, until few years ago, we kept on seeing these harrowing pictures of girls or kids who lost their eyeballs, not just eyesight, because of their pellet guns and all, right? And repeatedly we have seen so much violence, and this is structural violence and it is institutional violence, and yet the world community has not paid any heed. This time, let us hope that this case also actually pans out.
Yeah.
But Pakistan should also be invoking this universal jurisdiction.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Pakistan should be agitating the case more vociferously, because we are simpatico with the Kashmiris who are suffering right now.
Absolutely, and that's just
Farooq,
what I was thinking.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The pellet guns were actually given by the Israelis to Indians to use in Kashmir.
Yeah, I'm not going to correct that because I haven't seen the record. But the problem is the way it was used to destroy lives. There is a 12-year-old girl who was just sitting in her house in the window, and she was blinded, and they actually pulled out something like 70 pellets out of her skull.
It's absolutely horrible, but what I was confused about throughout and what I want to understand is if this universal jurisdiction principle is perhaps the way forward or the right way to get a legal action done. How come this wasn't done before?
Right. Whom are you asking this?
Anyone, both of you.
Faisal, go ahead.
I think it should have been done, but if somebody is coming up now, it's never too late. To me, I think it's a very good initiative. And earlier we were discussing how it would, affect the future of the other organizations as well. Number one, I just wanted to say the conclusion of this case, of course, it can be used as a precedent when they go to obviously Geneva or elsewhere or International Criminal Court or wherever. They can, in coming future, anyone can go in these courts
right.
and
but these are individuals who've stepped up now. How come this wasn't done before?
Right. Let me ask you one thing very quickly, Sana. Have you read Harry Potter?
Of course.
In that there is a room called Room of Requirement or the come and go room, right? The international law is more or less like that. One moment it is
I
there,
suppose.
next moment it is not.
Right.
Right. It all depends on
Good analogy,
precedent.
actually.
Hang on.
Actually, really answered
Yeah.
my question.
Yeah,
It's quite
but-
clear to me now.
Yeah,
But go ahead, go ahead.
But
Yes,
it
that's
is
just
basically
appreciating.
based on precedent, right?
Yeah.
And 1 minute there is a precedent, the next minute it is knocked down. But whenever you have the light and when the room is available, you should charge ahead and actually inculcate the negative forces. Right?
Absolutely, and we really hope that this is what this particular investigation actually achieves. We'll move on to our second topic of the debate with regards to the economic situation of the country, and of course the monetary policy and the State Bank maintaining the interest rate at 9.75%. For this, we've been joined by Mr. Ali Salman, who is the Executive Director of Prime Institute. Thank you very much for joining us in the debate. Can you hear me?
Yes, he can, I guess.
Unfortunately, we are unable to hear you. Can you please say something again?
Yes, I can
Yes.
hear you. I'm looking
Great.
forward to discussion. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Right,
hear you now.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining the debate. First of all, let us understand the fact that when we see any sort of changes in the interest rate, why are they done? And then, of course, with the way that the current government has acted in the past, we've seen last month that 100 basis points were increased with regards to the interest rate, of course, with its for its impact on inflation. It has now maintained the interest rate at 9.75% for the next month and a half. Why was this a step that was important, and how is this a step that is good for the economic situation at the moment?
Well, I think first of all, let's all recognize that this is probably the first monetary policy statement after the passage of the independence of State Bank bill by National Assembly. Why it is significant? It is significant because in this bill, it has been established that the primary function of State Bank would be price stability, which means a particular inflation number or inflation targeting or a band or a range of inflation. And that also, as you recently heard the Prime Minister when yesterday he was addressing the public on the telephone, that this is the single most important problem or the challenge of the government, rightly so. In the monetary policy statement itself, the State Bank mentions that their ideal inflation target is 5% to 7%. Whereas the latest PBS numbers suggest that year-on-year inflation was more than 12%. In an ideal scenario, to sort of beat that inflation, you have to increase the interest rate even further. Right? But obviously, that is not happening because that will also mean cost of lending, cost of borrowing will go up.
Right.
So
can you,
I think
Ali Sahab,
it
can
is.
you actually give us the pros and cons of this decision? I mean, if it is not increased, what is the negative side and what is the positive side, sir, in detail?
I think on the positive side, of course, the borrowers, the private sector borrowing has been on the high side for last 1 year. The credit to the private sector has increased significantly, including due to the concessionary financing of the State Bank. Exports have been rising. Exports have been taking credit. So on the positive side, if the rate has not increased, it means that at least that continued rate, they will continue to borrow more. Although some of the chambers and federation were expecting a decline in the rate, and I'm happy that the rate was not further declined. So I think that is on the positive side in terms of the private sector borrowing. On the negative side, as I said, I think there is still a room for a further increase in the in the interest rate to match the inflation target which the State Bank itself has defined, 5 to 7%.
But don't you think that actually raising that or hiking that would actually slow down the economic activity in the country?
Yeah, so that's the other factor. You see, because a significant part of our economy is informal, is not working through banks, is not working through documented informal sector. Let's say the agriculture sector, by and large, is small farmers, and they are not working through the banks. So I don't expect a significant decline in the economic activity. But I do see that if you increase the interest rate, then perhaps you can slow down the monetary expansions, slow down the monetary expansion, because the stock of the money itself becomes a reason for inflation.
Right.
Simply
But Ali
simple
sir,
reason is that our
Ali sir,
economy
with due
is not able
respect,
to
when you're
produce
talking
goods
about
with that speed.
this not actually impacting the economic activity, if I'm going to get a lot of interest on my money when I park it in a bank, why would I invest in any project that might be returning me less profits?
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, and if you recall, a couple of years ago, within this government, we saw that when the policy rate was significantly increased at that point in time, it attracted foreign capital. It attracted capital in stock market, in bonds, in government, in fixed income instruments. So I think that was the time where the sort of also we saw the inflow of international investment, at least in the financial market. Whereas when you are decreasing the interest rate, you do encourage to be spent more widely in the productive sector. So that's the trade-off which the policymakers would often like to see.
Right,
Yeah.
Ali. When we see the fact that, of course, this is all when we see and try and understand, perhaps not as easy for the general public to understand. These are, in fact, just numbers. But when we actually see their impact, that's what, of course, the common people are more interested in. What sort of an impact will it have on the lives of the common people? If you would have to explain it to somebody, the result of such a policy, are their lives going to be any better?
I'm afraid no, because let's say what is impacting our day-to-day lives, right? So for instance, the prices of prices of commodities, prices of petrol, prices of electricity, prices of food. So all the items are pretty independent of the variation in the interest rate movement, right?
But sir,
Because
can we say,
government is increasing the rate of electricity, for instance. There's a totally different dynamic. There's an IMF demand for raising the electricity tariff.
yeah,
So
sir, can we?
regardless of where increasing and decreasing, that will increase. So I do not expect, especially this time, because there has been no change in the interest rate. So obviously we would not expect any
Impact
change.
anyway.
All right,
Yeah,
sure.
However-
Last question, sir.
yeah,
Yes,
However,
Faisal.
Can we
say
say
that? Let
Sir,
me say
can
that,
we say, as you
because-
were earlier mentioning,
Sorry, yes, you can conclude. Yes,
Yeah.
Ali.
Sorry, just let me because I was saying that when we talk about, let's say, the employability, and when we talk about the job creation by the private sector, especially those who are the companies, firms which are in the export sector, who do get the loans from the banking sector, I think in a way that helps indirectly, but not directly as in terms of our day-to-day consumption. I do not see that happen.
sir, I had the same question as you earlier mentioned, that it is, of course, going to improve the exports. Then, of course, the increase in production as well we are expecting, and that would require more jobs to be made in the private sector. So, can't we say this, that it is going to be going to give a political mileage to the ruling party, sir?
And very quickly, if I can add, I know it is the last segment. Very quickly, is it going to actually appreciate the situation regarding the current account deficit if all this actually improves and the economic activity and exports pick up?
Yes, I mean, of course, we are trying to improve the current account deficit by two means. We are trying to raise the exports revenue. So if the private sector continues to borrow and invest in the productive activities and then earn exports, one definitely is going to increase and help reduction of the current account deficit. But also, I think when we have this schemes like Roshan digital accounts, Russian digital accounts have also attracted a lot of overseas Pakistanis to park their investment in Pakistani financial sector. And in that sense, actually, on the other hand, the raise in the interest rate will actually attract
Right.
them even
Thank
more.
you very much, Mr. Ali Salman. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your views. Of course, what we hope at the end of the day is for the economic progress of the country, and we hope that things are moving in the right direction so that the people of Pakistan can actually benefit from the changes that, of course, the government is trying to make. There are, of course, limitations to every action, but we really hope that it does trickle down to something beneficial for all. That's a lot that we have from the debate at the moment. Join us tomorrow at 9 for more stories.